Most of the sound you hear in a movie is added after the film has been shot and edited together. You may hopefully have dialogue that you've recorded during the shooting of the movie, but nowadays, most of the time, everything you hear from footsteps or handling of props or wind or storms in the movies, everything is something that's created later by sound editors and sound designers. The job that I have is to build up layers of sound from what you hear around you, right down to the handling of, you open a drawer and take out some papers and put it back on a desk or something like that. And so the idea of designing sound means that you are very selective about what you put in the soundtrack. It's not about being just accurate in a natural way. The best job you can do is if you're selecting sounds that help dramatize the story, that give color and detail to the ambience in the scene. You want to make sure the voices are clear and understandable. And in the case of certainly fantasy and science fiction, you're free to invent things that people have never heard before, and that's been more of the job that I've had over the many decades in cinema. As a child, I loved adventure movies, westerns, and science fiction, and I didn't have one real preference over another. Like most little boys, I loved make-believe, dressing up as a spaceman or a cowboy or a soldier, and putting on an act this way. And so when I got the job to work on the first Star Wars movie, I got quite excited because I really felt, here's a movie I understand completely. In fact, I had made movies with my friends as a child and growing up, and I'd kind of done space movies with ray guns and weapons, monsters. And so I really felt comfortable with that first opportunity that I had in Star Wars. And of course, because of the success of Star Wars, and I was typecast, but not in a negative way, to create more spaceships, robots, creatures, aliens, fantastic technology that you've never heard before. And so that's always been part of my career, working many years in Star Wars, also Star Trek, eventually working on a couple of the Star Trek movies in the later ones, and E.T. and a few others of that nature. But I've always loved getting out into other genres too. Indiana Jones, of course, is quite a bit different. And it's a fantasy movie as well, but not in the same way. Well, I never set out to be a sound person. Like most young filmmakers, I wanted to create my own films, write them, direct them, be the hero in them. But the reality is that as you begin to face getting a real career started, you have to specialize in some way. And coming out of film school, well, I'll put it this way, I actually went through school and got a degree in physics. I was very interested in science, and I wanted to be an astronaut. That was originally my choice of career. But my hobby was always movies, making little films, and then I had an interest in sound recording from my father, who had given me a small tape recorder when I was a child to play with, and I got very interested just in collecting sound. And so I had all these little skills, photography and sound. And when I was finishing film school, a few of us who wanted to get outside work while we were students found that there were available jobs doing sound editing in Hollywood, that you could work on trailers and low-budget science fiction movies, Roger Corman films. And so I started working in sound because it was an opportunity to get employment. And since I had a background in sound, I got more and more involved in it. I discovered that there weren't that many people, young people, interested in sound. And here I was interested, and so I began getting more job offers to do sound. And that led to being noticed and getting a job with George Lucas on Star Wars, partly because I was young and I was cheap. I was just a student, really, had finished school, so I didn't have any preconceived notions. They could train me the way they wanted to. So I got involved in sound, even though I never lost my interest in filmmaking in general. The discovery of sounds usually begins when I see artwork of objects or characters that are going to be in the film. You know, on Star Wars, the very first meeting that I ever had with George Lucas, I was shown paintings by Ralph McQuarrie of artwork. Here's what a Wookiee looks like. Here's what the spaceship looks like. Here's what a lightsaber looks like. And when I saw that painting of the lightsaber, I had immediately, I could hear a sound in my imagination. And so often I'm stimulated, or reading about it in the script, I get an inspiration. And then you do go about collecting or trying to make sounds, and there's the inevitable process of trial and error, because you have something in mind and you're searching for it. And often it takes weeks or months even to find the right sound if you have that amount of time. So it's a process of hearing it almost in your imagination and then searching for a source that gives you that result. The jobs that I do, which are often called sound design, those jobs have actually always existed with sound people from the first time that sound was synchronized with a movie, and perhaps even further back in silent days. The difference was that at the time that Star Wars was made, George Lucas was working outside the Hollywood system, outside the normal union system, traditions, and he thought that the person recording and manufacturing sound and editing the sound and then re-recording the sound really should be the same person, or certainly the same team of people, whereas the tradition in Hollywood had been separate groups. One that recorded on location, another group recording sound effects later, and then another group doing sound editing, and then they pass on that work to sound mixers. So instead of having this process where you pass them work along, the idea was to have one person oversee, if not participate, in all of those steps, so that there was a vision, one concise vision, you're working for the director, George Lucas, at that case, so you're trying to follow through on his vision, add your own voice to it. And as technology has changed into the digital realm, the tools for sound recording, editing, and mixing now were merged all into one application, you might say. So new people coming along are trained to recognize and have skill in all of those areas which used to be highly divided from one another. And so yes, it's gotten to the point where if they're given the chance and the budget allows it and time, that you can be present through all the different steps. Once again, it all depends on what the producers, the people in charge want to do, whether they want just a giant crew doing separate tasks, or whether they want to focus on one artist to help them the most, speak for them. As I grew up, I loved watching movies on television, and I began to tape record the films off television because I love playing the back and listening on headphones. This is before there were DVRs or DVDs or anything. So for me, it was entertainment. And I would spend a lot of time listening to the films over and over and over again for entertainment. I didn't realize it, but what I was learning was how sound was used to add to the drama of a movie. I was very interested in what music did, and I was very interested in the sound effects. Once again, I was interested in westerns and science fiction and Tarzan movies. And in those types of films, the sound played a magnified role. And I just got very interested in how things sounded in the movies. They didn't sound the same as in real life, actually. I discovered that there were techniques and there was a language to cinema. And so I kind of, without knowing it, learned a lot of this as I just was a lover of movies growing up. And I could carry that with me into my own work. I could, if I worked on Star Wars, when I worked on the first Star Wars, I could remember back all the different science fiction movies that preceded it. I knew them very well. So I understood what had been done. So I was in a good position to decide, here's where the frontier is, where nobody's gone. I can go past that. But recognizing the traditions and building on them, I think that's what helped my career quite a bit. That awareness of legacy. You're basically saying, are there films that I've worked on really proud of that nobody has heard of?
No, not nobody heard of, but I really want to talk about them, and I'm curious because maybe there are interesting stories that we haven't heard yet. Well,
interestingly, I always loved documentary film. And I think I would have been a documentary filmmaker if it had been a way I could make enough living to support a family doing it, because I loved going out on expeditions to study a subject and to not only record sound but take films of a place or an environment. I had the opportunity back in the 80s and 90s to work on several IMAX films about space. And they were scientific films. They were the IMAX 70 millimeter format, which was shown in these enormous cinemas, IMAX and Omnimax. And I started out doing sound for a few of those films. Then I ended up directing a couple of them. And that was a tremendous opportunity to do films which are meant to be very realistic. Yet you still needed to exaggerate a bit. You still needed to create sounds that you just couldn't record. And the time I was working, it was the very first time that anyone ever recorded the space shuttle taking off and landing and gliding back to Earth. And we sent recorders up inside the space shuttle to record the motors and the environments inside the astronaut activities. And so that was fascinating to me because part of the year I'd be working on science fiction in space, and part of my year I'd be working on reality in space. And I could steal a bit of either one in each genre. And I was very proud of the sound that was done in the space films and the ones done for IMAX, because they were shown at museums around the world. They weren't in regular cinemas at that time. And yet a great deal of effort went into making them realistic, but in the same time dramatic and emotional, without violating too many rules of reality. So that was a very fun adventure. For years I did that. Oh yeah, The Signal. That's right.
I love that one.
Really, I didn't know anybody had ever seen it.
It's a small cult of science fiction. Come on, it's really loved on Letterboxd, for example.
Yeah,
it's
okay.
A small cult, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
It got forgotten completely from where I am.
Not in cinephile small circles.
Really?
Yeah.
Okay.
So my question for you is, what changes for a professional like you when the budget is a little bit tighter?
Well, that particular film, it was, what was the title over here? Was it the same?
Mm-hmm.
The same title? The Signal was a fascinating project because I had 10 days to do it.
Oh.
Okay? It was done over Christmas vacation very quickly, and my son and I got together to do this entire sound together. So that was a fun challenge because having such a short schedule meant that we just had to go for it. Just think of an idea and try it. Think of an idea and try it out. And I loved that. I loved it. I loved it because you didn't feel like there was you could fail because it was ridiculous doing it in 10 days. Yet I really did enjoy it because it asked for a lot of imagination. It wanted things to be weird and subtle, which was unlike Star Wars. I know it was interesting because when the director first came up to listen to some of the things, I started working on it before he got there. And he came up the first day, and I showed him a couple sample temporary scenes, and he actually didn't like it because I had taken kind of a Star Wars approach where everything was up front and kind of literal and big. Yet what he really was going for was much more amorphous and weird and subtle. And once I understood that, I could shift gears into that mode. I had always wanted to do a film like that. And I would do more if there was opportunities for it. But it was fun having to work so quickly because you just went from your heart. You just said, oh my gosh, what am I going to do here? I'll just try a strange hissing background with a little filtering of it, an echo or something. And that turned out to work well. And then there were the weird sounds of the running and the laboratory and everything underneath, the equipment, that sort of thing. Yeah. I'm surprised anybody remembers it, but thank you for bringing it up.
It was a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay.